Kresge Programs and Writers Society is hosting a creative writing workshop on the topic How to Create Intimacy in Your Writings on Wednesday, February 24th. In preparation for the workshop, we've asked some of the UCSC creative writing instructors to share excerpts of their own work that they feel depicts intimacy in their writing. We hope you enjoy.
My name is Gary Young, and I'm going to read 4 short poems that deal with different kinds of intimacies. The first poem considers the intimacy that we sometimes feel with strangers. The next is a poem about one of my sons, then a poem about marriage, and I'll end with a poem about friendship. He was drinking in the airport bar, and I asked, "Are you coming or going?" "I have been there," he said, "and I almost didn't get back." He said, "The engines failed and we seemed to be falling forever. I've never been so afraid." Then he took a sip of his drink and rolled down his sleeve. He'd printed his name down the length of his arm, and below that he'd written, "Honey, I love you." "It's strange," he said, "what goes through your mind at a time like that. I hope to God this washes off," he said. "My wife just loves to worry." It's a joy to be subtracted from the world. Holding my son's naked body against my own, all I feel is what he is. I cannot feel my own skin. I cannot feel myself touching him. But I can recognize his hair, the heft of his body, his weight, his warmth. I cannot measure my own being, my subtle boundaries, but I know my son's arms, the drape of his legs, smooth and warm in a shape I can measure. I have become such a fine thing, the resting place for a body I can know. I left home when I was 17. 17 years later, you and I were married, and today we have been married for 17 years. It's a queer calculus. For 17 years I have turned to you in the dark and teased your nipples with my tongue. I have watched your body swell with children, and I have seen our children slip startled and wide-eyed into the world. There's a locust that rises from the ground only once every 17 years. When the time comes, bury me deep. It's only love that's held me here this long, and even in the grave, I'll still want you in my bones. Elizabeth fed me. Pasta with anchovies, lentils with sage, always a different dish. Jean talked about love nests, the prairie in winter, and how once as a child he had determined he was God. We sat at a table and looked out at a ginkgo and a locust, and in spring a crabapple blossomed beneath the upstairs window. There were paintings on every wall, ceramics on every shelf, and flowers, orchids, zinnias, asters. Elizabeth once made a salad with spinach, walnuts, blue cheese, and pear. Then she picked a daylily from a bouquet on the counter, chopped it, and sprinkled it over the greens. We spent years that way, feasting on the world.
Hi there. My name is Jennifer Tsun, and I'm going to read you a poem from my collection Not So Dear Jenny, which was made with my Chinese father's English letters. The title, "But We Two Can Never Divorce Each Other," is a line taken from one of his letters. But we two can never divorce each other. The longing to marry your father, expressed in 2 languages, doubles the feeling. The ocean between you elongates the longing. As a child, I wanted to go to the pyramids, to Egypt, to outer space. Without knowing I was waiting, I waited and waited. There was no proposal. He married someone else, someone who smiled a lot, whose scorn was palpable. When he died, she vanished. Every time he said, "We two can never divorce each other," I wanted to leave him. Every time he said, "We two can never divorce each other," I wanted to stay with him forever. I looked for someone else to marry. I developed a fondness for people who pretended to be my father. It was a very exciting time. Some of my best fathers were women. In the end, I married a replica of my sister. If he wasn't going to marry me, I wasn't going to marry him either. Every night I sleep in the arms of my child while he sleeps in his grave. But we two can never divorce each other. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nathan Javier Rosorio, and this is my poem, Boys of Color. Brother, I found what we started looking for when we turned 7. What we prayed for beneath quilt forts, what we thought knocked from the inside of the glove box of the neighbor's burned out truck. It's what we always knew shook the cavity of the ram we unburied from behind the tuberculosis ward. What sent us running back down the side of the mountain. Do you remember him? I think he's always known we'd find it because it reminds me of his hands. The way they looked when he proudly assembled the IKEA furniture, glue sealing the cuts he confided were from stacking the coarse bodies of pineapples in a produce department built like a replica farm. The ceiling's cartoon sun casting triangle beams of yellow over the spotless corrugated tin roofs and crates of kiwis in an eternal daytime. Brother, stay with me. A little longer like the other rays of lightning do. The storm tore open when we gave up, and the last time I saw you, you sat cross-legged at its gaping jaw. Your AM/FM radio antenna pointed towards the gray, playing the top 40 loop Boppy heard as he swept the early morning aisles, populated by the repeating grins of Orville Redenbacher and the Sun-Made Girl. It's years later now. I never thought I'd find it here, underground and illuminated by my wind-up flashlight. Its pale heart reverberating out from the tunnelways, its ancestral music maddening our recycled blood. I was afraid I'd turn on you, pull out your last gulp of air to make it mine. Together, we would have been spat back into the flooding arroyo, blended into the clay by constricting snakes and human muscle. Brother, when did it all go wrong?
Yes, good morning. My name is Rob Sean Wilson, and I'm a teacher in the literature department here for the last 20 years, and I plan to keep doing that in the foreseeable future. Anyway, I'm glad to contribute 2 poems to the Kresge College writing program they're reading during COVID. So the first is a poem called Broken Record, and it was written in Taipei when I was teaching a class in Taiwan about sort of writing in poetry, and the students were using English as a second language, and their poems were quite good. Actually, it's in Hsinchu, just to the south of Taipei. And so I wanted to capture, excuse me, the sense that a lot of what we learn about love is from the records and the pop chart and the like, and sort of the faded patterns of that. So here goes. Broken Record. These rough-made poems that emanate like broken records spill their tender orients of light from the pop charts. Into the Sinju student dormitory at midnight, where the Broken Heart Factory churns out the latest version of ancient genres like tragicomedy or a love that was never meant to be. Superb how this history of literature and romance repeats itself in the sigh of the Taiwan sophomore or the courageous adultery of the taxi driver or wonton cook. Maybe, as they say, the letter G is hidden inside the name of God. The timing is obviously wrong, but the lover chooses yet another red rose to give to his lovely mommy substitute as a Valentine. But she, too, has been hurt by this broken record and can only mime the beat refrains. Ouch. There goes that history of imperial romance playing all over again. Yeah, so the next poem was based on the experience of Korean Buddhism. And I had been working with a Korean translator, Peter Lee, and he wanted me to touch up the English of a whole range of modern Korean poems for a book he published called Silence of Love with University of Hawaii Press. Anyway, and I had working on his translations and Korean Buddhist poetry for a whole weekend, and then I walked out of my hotel in Waikiki. Well, it was a high-rise apartment in a hotel building near the LOI Canal, and I had the experience of the void that a lot of Korean poems were talking about. So I portrayed it this way. It's called Nothing. Beneath the glaze of water in the pool, beneath my churning flesh hands, beneath my hands cutting through water, nothing hangs there waiting, a taste of nothing at the jaw. As we walk past the arena of stars, nothing, past the gas stations, broken wine bottles, nothing. I tried to tell you what I am tasting, nothing. In the sun above, nothing. In the moon, nothing. Under martial law, the petals fall, nothing. In the cure of the Buddha, nothing. In the talk of the old poets, nothing. In the look of our eyes after sex, nothing. In the wind of the land, nothing. We walk holding hands. We pass on nothing. Slender gods of Korea come to nothing. In the room of the scrolls, the edited jewels, full of sound, nothing. Full of passion, nothing. Full of me, nothing. Everywhere I look, nothing. And it is radiant and singing, nothing. Nothing. Okay, thank you. So take care of yourselves and keep writing.
Bears are solitary creatures. They mumble to themselves as they go along. They have the best sense of smell on earth. Their sense of smell is 2,100 times better than a human's. Imagine what raw honey or a ripe raspberry might smell like to a bear. Does the smell thunder over a bear like a storm or sting like a bee? What is it like to live mostly alone in a pungent world? While a bear's vision is similar to ours, deer see only blue-violet, but in ranges we can't detect. And while predators like us and like bears focus in on the singular, deer, always potential prey, can keep the entire horizon in focus at once. What would that be like? All that blue-violet clarity. Dying people are focused on the work of unbecoming. On the last night of the father's life, he insisted they carry him from the bed to the recliner and back again, searching for a comfortable resting place in a body that no longer housed him comfortably until finally breathing took all his attention. Or perhaps the work of breathing meant nothing to him, and his mind ranged freely over all he knew. The daughter had wanted to ask him, Now what does it feel like? And now what? And now? But by then he was done with words. Something she never told people in California was that the father had been a hunter, had once shot a bear and eaten it and used its fat to grease his boots and made it into a headless rug that she had liked to play on as a child. She would brush her palm over the stiff top fur, then reach into the softer fur underneath. The father had killed the bear in the back of the log cabin one morning. He just looked out the window, ran out, and shot it. He was naked. Both of them were, the bear and the man. It didn't seem to bother the father, the killing. But a few months later, he dreamt he was being attacked by a bear. He said it was like Jacob wrestling the angel. He started shouting and striking about, in real life, not in the dream. My favorite Ursula Le Guin story is called Solitude. In an email thread, writer Nisi Shaw writes that solitude is a story about the writing process and about communing with nature. Writer Molly Gloss writes that it was about the impossibility of communication between parents and children. This anthropologist takes her daughter with her to a post-apocalyptic planet in which solitude is prized. The anthropologist's mother reads the community as backwards and uncivilized, but the daughter loves this world where there are no people, only persons. The daughter writes, "In the greatness of my joy, I thought that when I was grown and went out alone, I would go to the seashore and watch the sea beasts shimmering their colors and tunes till I knew what they were thinking. I would listen, I would learn, till my soul was as large as the shining world. And though it is of the others, of relationships that I write, the heart of my life has been my being alone. I think there is no way to write about being alone. To write is to tell something to somebody, to communicate to others." Once, while walking alone in the woods, the daughter was taken over by this feeling, the kind of feeling they call piercing, a longing to go back to the beginning place, when she was young and her father was alive and young and everyone was young and full of their sap, fierce and green enough to rattle the universe. The feeling was so piercing that it seemed as if it could make a little rip, just big enough for her to squeeze through, and she would be there, blinking in the dust of the dirt road in her embroidered overalls, between the barn and the 3-story farmhouse, the geese carrying on from their pen, the swallows pouring from under the eaves of the barn, the comforting smell of dusty hay, and the honeyed scent of the sweet alyssum that blossomed out of the dried cow manure. But we can only go forward, as everyone knows. It seemed like a longer journey out of the woods than in, branches brushing her like fur.